Alright, going to do this video to show how to do an automotive compression test today. The reason that you would want to do a compression test on an engine like this one right here is to determine if there's any problems in the combustion chamber. So if you have a vehicle that comes in and it's running rough, not running well, or if you're just questioning how good an engine is, whether it's an old one, new one, whatever, a compression test is for you. The steps are fairly basic. You're going to need an automotive compression tester, and you're going to need the ability to take out all your spark plugs. All right, we're going to get after this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect my coils on this coil over plug engine. And then I'm going to remove the coils and spark plugs one at a time. And we're going to analyze those plugs. I'm just going to show you the first one, and then I'm going to speed this up. So this is the coil over plug. I want to make sure that I'm getting these back in the same spot afterwards, just in case there is a problem. And then I'm going to take out the spark plug. Make sure that your spark plug holes are clean where the spark plug is, so no dirt or debris drops in there. And make sure that you're using a spark plug socket when you take it out. They can be a little stuck at first, but spark plugs usually come out pretty easily. If you have good rubber in your spark plug socket, it should come out on the edge of the socket. So that's my spark plug right there. People always look at these things and say, oh wow, it's black, it looks terrible. And black's not really a bad color when it comes to spark plugs. Dark browns and blacks are fairly quite normal for the inside of a combustion chamber. When I take these spark plugs out, I want to lay them down in the same order that I took them out. That way, if I notice any bad test results with my compression test, I can go back and compare them with my spark plug and possibly tell the story. Anyways, I'm going to speed this up a little bit as I take out the other 3 coils and spark plugs. Okay, so now that all my spark plugs are out and all my coils are out, I've gone to ProDemand and I've printed out the procedure for a compression test. Not that I really need to know how to do it, it's just that the procedure also had the spec on it and what it should be. What I've drawn down here is the front of my engine and 4 cylinders, and I'm going to record my compression readings in here. As it gets more complicated with V8s and V6s and stuff, to keep track in your head which one was bad, you don't want to just forget and guess of which cylinder was the bad cylinder. If we happen to have a bad cylinder and try to diagnose this, we're going to have to know for sure which one it is. Important for the compression test is that if you're going to compare it to something, that you give it the same type of conditions. So right now this engine's room temperature, it's only started for a brief second and shut itself off, so it hasn't been running long. If I wanted to compare this to another vehicle or another situation of this engine's compression test, I'd want to make sure those conditions are met the same. Fully charged battery is really important. As we're going to be cranking over this engine to achieve our compression, it's not going to be running. It's going to need battery power and our starter to do this for us. So we need a fully charged battery. Even a light battery charge on is recommended, so you get the same type of readings all the way through. So I'm going to record my readings on that piece of paper. And before I jump into my test here, I have to make sure that I have disconnected the spark and disconnected the fuel. That's what a cylinder needs for combustion inside. So I don't want those things happening while I'm doing my compression test. This one with coil over plug, just by disconnecting the coil and taking it out, you've disconnected your spark. So the most common way for disconnecting the fuel is either unplugging the injectors or going into your fuse and relay center over here and unplugging your fuel pump relay. This one's right here. I'm gonna take out my fuel pump relay out of my box there. It says right on this cover, fuel pump, so I'm sure this is the right one. And that's probably the easiest way to disconnect fuel on your vehicle when you're doing a compression test. All right, so now we're ready to start our test. I'm gonna start at the front of the engine and I'm gonna do cylinder number 1. So I'm gonna find a hose in my compression test kit that's the same as the spark plug. I'm gonna plug in my compression gauge here, and here's what it looks like. When I turn over the engine with the key switch there, you're gonna see this needle jump, and those are compression strokes. So we need to test a consistent number of compression strokes each time we do this. My number is 5. I like to do 5. But as I look at this manual today, it says to do 4, and I'm gonna stick to what the manual says. So I've got one hand on the key, one hand on the gauge. I have no spark connected and no fuel connected, so this is gonna be a safe test, and we're gonna get 4 compression strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see that that needle stopped right on 150, so that's what I'm gonna write down. If I were to accidentally go over to 5, I would just reset the pressure and do it again. I want to make sure that I do 4 consistent compression strokes each time I do this test. After I have my reading, I can let the pressure off with the release valve, take out my hose, and go to the next cylinder. It really doesn't take long to do the compression test after you've done the legwork of taking out the spark plugs, but as if you've changed a lot of spark plugs in your life, you know some of them can be quite difficult, and that can take the bulk of your job. 1, 2, 3, 4. My gauge just trickles down a little bit, so I try to take my reading as fast as I can. And I had a reading of not quite 160, so I'm gonna write down 155. Those numbers, whether it be like 156, 157, aren't going to be extremely crucial as I do this. So if I'm off by a few PSI, it's not a big deal, but you don't want to be off by, 5 to 10 PSI. That could be a big deal. Gonna do cylinder 3. You shouldn't notice it getting gassy. You shouldn't hear any spark going. If you notice any of those things, it's probably because you didn't disconnect it properly, and you can stop and do that now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, that one got pretty much right to 155. The reason it might leak down a little bit of pressure is probably just the valve core that's in the end of my hose, but it's not got much of a leak, so I'm pretty confident I'm getting pretty good numbers here. And you can see it's still at 150, so it's not really the end of the world there. Okay. Cylinder number 4. One, 2, 3, 4. I think that one made it all the way up to 160 that time. I'll have to watch my video playback as I'm not staring at the gauge I'm putting in front of the GoPro. And just like everybody, I'm a mechanic, not an artist here. I maybe marked front on the wrong side. Made a quick adjustment to front on this side. And this is the way that those 4 cylinders measured, okay? So we've got good pressure across all 4, but here's what GM's looking for. Now, GM doesn't have the highest quality when it comes to their PSI rating inside their cylinders, okay? So for each cylinder, I crank through 4 compression strokes. The lowest reading should not be less than 70% of the highest. So 70% is gonna be about 45 PSI difference when we have one around 150. So that's not an exact number, but you would do the numbers when you get them, okay? But like 105 and 110 would be acceptable with the 150, because no cylinder should be less than 100 PSI. So you're gonna see a lot of the domestic vehicles here made in North America. They're gonna have a lot of wide variety like this, but you're gonna see some more higher performance vehicles, something that you've spent a little bit more money on its engine, be a lot more precise for what they recommend here. Okay, so that's the results from our compression test. This compression test has passed. There's nothing wrong with this engine, nor did I expect there to be, as it was running good when it came in. If I happen to have some low cylinders throughout this procedure, what I would have done next is I would have taken a look at all 4 spark plugs to read them, you know, look for the presence of oil or maybe combustion happening in a different way inside that cylinder. But after a failed compression test comes the wet compression test and the cylinder leakage test. And I'm going to document those in an entirely separate video. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take these spark plugs and I'm going to gap them. I'm going to put them back in the cylinder head with no anti-seize, no compounds whatsoever on the spark plug. I'm going to torque those spark plugs into place, and then I'm going to mount my coils back over top. I'm going to reconnect my spark and reconnect my fuel, and that will be a completed compression test.